Well, the Islamic State fighters claiming ISIS affiliation have seized a strategic port in Mozambique. The group, which has taken its adventure to a whole new level, is seen adorning the military uniform and using sophisticated weapons. The group, calling itself Ansar al-Sunnah, is now an affiliate of ISIS and had released a video in March of three militants standing in front of a burning village. One of the men is seen holding the black flag of the Islamic State. It is also found to recruit young men, promising them lucrative jobs and exploiting the socioeconomic conditions of young people.
All right, let's bring in FARAI MUVUTI, a political analyst with the Southern African Times, as he joins us now to discuss the situation in Mozambique, and looking at how things have actually played out. FARAI, where insurgents linked to ISIS have allegedly captured the port. It's good to have you on the show today. Give us a breakdown of what has happened leading up to this point.
Well, thank you for having me yet again. Well, it is reported that on Tuesday, insurgents overwhelmed the local security forces that were there. So it's a number of about 1,000 insurgents that overwhelmed the local security forces in partnership with the private security forces hired by the Mozambican government. And it is alleged, well, it is reported that it was as a consequence of the local military forces of the government not having any further ammunition to defend the port. This is a very strategic port. It is a Masimba de Praio port, which is where a lot of the developments that are being transferred. It's a 60 kilometers away from the current LNG project, which costing about over 60 billion in terms of its value. And that's where it's a strategic port where a lot of the developments being done there are transported. Equipment, be it equipment for the developments being done there, that's the port that is used. It's also quite strategic in terms of being one of the only strategic routes to get to that particular port. Now, so it is very, I think it's a question of what the government's response would be and what the region's response would be, because that would be a port that not only further weakens the government's position in terms of this occupancy, but equally strengthens the insurgents' positioning, because they'll be able to transport more equipment if we are to go by what government suspects, which is that part of that insurgency is being supported by a foreign hand.
It's really worrying to see this play out, FARAI. I mean, the last time you were on the show, we were speaking about the $60 billion gas plant investment that's going on in northern Mozambique. And now we're hearing that ISIS-linked members have taken over a port so close to that region. What does this tell us? Because many are suggesting that this may just be the cusp of a much larger offensive.
Well, I think we have to look at it from, and I think if you recall last time we had this discussion, I did allude to the geopolitical dynamics at play here. So one may open a few questions in relation to the type of investment, the sizable investment that we're seeing, and the growth of the ISIS insurgency. It seems to me that there are parallels here when looking at places such as Syria, Libya, and so forth. So there's an open question about this holy alliance of investment and how these entities, these insurgencies, tend to sort of be found wherever these sort of entities are. So there's a question there. But also, if we're looking at it from the local side of things, from a local and analytical perspective, Mozambique earlier this year suffered quite a huge, was hit hard by the climate change impact of the Cyclone Idai event that even affected the northern side of Zimbabwe. Now, that had a displacing impact. It had a social economic impact as well. Now, if we're to look at it from a principle of continuity perspective, which is that when the impact of time going forward and without perhaps limited government intervention due to the economic hardships that are within the region, and from a continental perspective, if we're to combine the pandemic aspect as well, we would see a social unrest dynamic there. And it wouldn't be far-fetched to assume that part of the recruitment drive within the insurgency, when looking within that economy, is further impacted as a consequence of this particular local dynamic that's at play. Now, what does it mean? I think the larger scale here is that the region now has a new frontier in terms of the point of entry for insurgency. So there's going to need to be a strong response from a regional perspective. Without that, we might see it elsewhere.
Right. Talking about the strong response, FARAI, the reports coming in is that the Mozambique army are taking a position outside a port in the far north of Mozambique, and reinforcements have been rushed into position around the port. What should we expect? What do you expect?
Well, I think what should be expected is, firstly, we have to read what the region says, because firstly, Mozambique already has sort of hired outside help, which are private security firms from South Africa and Russia. But this will not be enough, and even the aiding of ammunition and so forth is not going to be sufficient. There needs to be a coordinated regional approach that can stem the issue as it grows. I think this issue was raised last year, early in 2017. Okay, and one of the weaknesses that we saw was the delay that we got from the government of Mozambique. That firstly, they denied it to even be an insurgency. They thought it was banditry, and as it scaled and quickly scaled, we then saw the acknowledgement that actually there is a military insurgency that has ideology related to ISIS. Now, I think with the current growth, and also as we've seen, this is now the fourth time that they've occupied a strategic port. If we are going to see this escalate, if it's going to be diminished, it's going to require a joint force within the region, and this is not new. If you recall, in the early 80s. The Renamo forces of Mozambique during the time when there was a civil war, the Renamo forces were quarreled as a consequence of the joint operations between Zimbabwe and South Africa. Zimbabwe military forces went in and were quickly able to settle that issue. Of course, it then continued, but critical resources and strategic points within the Masasai port were preserved as a consequence of that joint operation. There now needs to be a similar sense of urgency if it's going to be contained. And if it's going to avoid a situation whereby the regional liberation movement region, which is 14 countries with relative histories, will be under siege, and that will be challenged as a consequence of the many political and socio-economic imbalances that are currently occurring within that region.
All right, many thanks to you, FARAI, MUVUTI. We'll be still keeping an eye on that particular story as things actually break. Talking about FARAI, MUVUTI, a political analyst with the Southern African Times, here on NEWSDAY. Thank you very much for your time.